questions. Like, God, like we said in the very beginning, God, what are you doing? Right? The very first week when we saw that Jesus had to go into Samaria. And then even last week, God, what are you speaking to me in the midst of what you're doing? And we begin to tie in all the different things that God has really been showing us through this year, whether it's been through the different capitals or the different things that you and I have to give. And then there's the week in there that there was No Hype Sunday, where Todd sat up here and he talked about spiritual warfare. And I think for some of us, it opened up some doors and some eyes to things that we're like, oh, now I understand why some of this stuff is happening and why I'm experiencing some of these things. Well, yeah, because we're in a war, right? And this war is not one against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities, powers, and ruled forces of, it's there, right? And we see it more and more. We see the effects of it. I think more than anything, we see the effects of it, but we just don't, we like attribute it to something else. And it's really just spiritual war that's going on. And it has ramifications within the spiritual. And so as we kind of came into this last part of this month, and this is the last Sunday of February, and we get a leap year this year, so we get an extra day. Everybody says, yay, I guess. And any leap year babies in here? Anybody? Somebody I was just talking to the other day either has a brother or sister that was born on leap year. So it's kind of crazy. They're like 7 years old. Even though they're like 40 or something, I don't know. So, but as we kind of end this month, and we've kind of been in this series called So Much More, next week we're going to start a series that's going to lead us up to Easter. But it's just called This for That. And next week we're going to talk about the most simple thing that Jesus said, but yet probably the hardest thing, where he says, follow me. And what it means to take up our cross and follow him. And so we're going to start right there. And so, like, we say this for that, we're saying, okay, are we willing to trade this for that? For what we want versus what God wants. And over that next few weeks, we're going to go through many different aspects of following Jesus, which will lead us up to Easter. And Easter really is going to be wrapped around this one little quote that I found from Eugene Peterson in his book, The Jesus Way. He just simply says this: the resurrection is the reminder that the last thing wasn't the worst thing. Think about that. We're going to talk about that on Easter. Because for everybody in that moment, seeing Jesus die on that cross, being laid in the tomb, it seemed like it was the worst thing. But it wasn't the last thing. Because God wasn't done. Right? And so I know that there's many of us in this room, we went through different seasons of life, or maybe going through something right now, and it seems like the worst thing. But the resurrection reminds us that it's not the last thing. Right? And so we get to kind of move forward to that. So we're going to go into this. But as we kind of came back to this little last Sunday in February, I was like, what is it, God, that you're trying to say? Because I wanted to go through the end where the woman goes into Samaria, right? She goes into town after being kind of pushed to the noontime to try to get all the stuff she needs, and she's kind of ashamed and maybe has some guilt and all this stuff, or fear of what people might think, say to this place where she meets Jesus. And then she goes into Samaria right in the middle of town in the heat of day, and she goes in and tells them about this guy who could be the Messiah, who was one that told her everything about herself. Now think about that. He told her everything about herself, and she's going into this place proclaiming this. Like, hey, he told me everything. They're like, you're telling us now and verifying that, yes, what you did and who you are is true, because this guy now who you say is the Messiah is coming and doing this. So think about this for a minute. She goes in there, and it says that then they all come out to meet Jesus. Okay? And in meeting Jesus, it says that some began to follow him. Some began to listen to his teachings, and they begged him to stay there for a few more days. And so it says that Jesus stayed there, and while he was there, many more began to follow him and all these different things. And so there's a little message in there which is like, hey, sometimes God's going to use your story before other people really begin to truly know who he is. Because if you look at it, they believed initially because of her, what? Story. They initially believed that he was who she said he was because of what she said to them. And then once they got to know Jesus, then they began to know him for themselves. So don't devalue what God wants to do with you and what your story is. Because some of us, we just push it aside and go, oh, can God really use that? Yes, he can. And so I was like, well, God, is that That's one, right? There's one message. Then I started thinking about all the different things that are going on in the church and really what God's doing and what God's preparing us for and all the different things that are happening. And so I started thinking about what does it look like to really challenge us in this area of serving? Because there's a group of people in here that serve a lot, right? And so I began to think about this, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting in my recliner reading my Bible one day, and I come back to the message in which Todd spoke about spiritual warfare, that we're in a war. And all of a sudden I had this thought, right? And the thought was this: serving is an act of war. You ever thought about that for a minute? Think about war in general. Everybody, when everything's heightened right now, right now we live in a heightened world. At any moment, these cell towers go down this week and everybody's like, oh my gosh, it's here. China's invading, right? We lost our cell phones, right? And all of a sudden everything's going, but everybody's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do that's going to tick so-and-so off and then Kim Jong-un's going to push that button, and then all of a sudden we're all going to be gone, and we're just trying to, what is it? What is this? And so really whenever there's this rumor of war, we really want to try to avoid things that kind of look like acts of aggression, right? And so if we're in this war, what we got to begin to understand is there's some things that we're going to go on the offense with, and some of these things I think we've never thought about it in that way. And so as I kind of went through a couple different things, what I began to see, and what I began to ask myself this question is, it's the question we've been asking through this, is God, what are you calling me to do? What do you call me to do? And this has been a big thing amongst our elders, amongst our staff, all these different things. We're redefining everything that's happening based on calling. God, what are you calling us to do? Because calling matters. You can be talented, you can be gifted, you can be really great at all these things, but man, if calling is absent, oh man, we're missing it, right? Or if we just don't really feel like that's the way God's moving us, and so we got to figure this out, right? And so I began to think about calling. I began to think about my personal calling. Katie's been thinking about what it is that God's asking her to do, and the calling that she has, that she's teaching right now in Marie Spear, and she's dealing with these kids that they just don't have much. They haven't had many people believe in them, really, right? Because obviously they're there for a reason. And so, God, what do you ask me to do here? But man, I really have this heart, this is my wife. I really have this heart to serve people, to love people, to serve in the church and all. Okay, God, so where's this? Okay, I can start my bachelor's degree because I really, she's I'm 47. Oops, I shouldn't have said that, right? No, just turned 47. Okay, she's proud of it, I guess, hopefully. But she is at this place of going, if I go back to school, man, I'm 50 when I get my degree, right? And so she's kind of weighing this, do I really want to go sit in algebra classes? And how many are no, I do not want to, right? And so she's trying to figure all this out. At the same time, we're looking at all the different things that God has placed in our life and the different callings He's had on our life, and we're kind of at the stage of looking at them right in the face and going, okay, this is getting really interesting really quick, God. What are you calling me to do? And we know that in different seasons of our life, there's a little bit more required of us. Some of us try to go into seasons doing the same old thing that we used to do, and we're wondering why we're not equipped in that next season. Well, because God's wanting to do something new, right? And so God's doing a new thing, and so a new thing's going to require something new within you that He wants to do. But as we look at all this stuff, the more I keep coming back to it, is God is just preparing us for the war that we're already in. The war that we're in. And what I began to realize is I went back to the very beginning of John chapter 4. Jesus made this very clear. He said, now I have to go to Samaria. We've already went through this. If you haven't heard the messages, go back online. They're online. You can listen to them. The week we were at the offices, we talked a lot about this and the fact of God, what are you doing? But He had to go there. There was a war that needed to be fought, and He's the one that needed to step foot in that region. right? And so he came asking for water to a woman who was at the well at noon. But because of that interaction, because of that he ended up opening up the gospel and opening up the kingdom to the people that the Jewish people didn't like, the Samaritans. Which ultimately, if you continue to read through, and maybe the reason why Philip goes back to Samaria in Acts chapter 8, and it says that many were added to that number because maybe back they remember that time that they sat there listening to Jesus, and now they truly understand that he's the Messiah, because now Philip's coming here telling of this Jesus who died on the cross, rose again, and I saw him in person, and now I'm here to proclaim to you that Jesus is now alive, he's not dead. So he is who he says he is. He started a war. He said, this is mine. These are my people. This is my land. And he opened up the door. Oftentimes, your calling will come from your had tos. I had to do this. As I look over my life, there's a lot of things that I had to do. It wasn't, now let me phrase it this way a little bit easier for you. I could have just continued to do what I was doing. But if I would have continued to do what I was doing, I would have continued to live in this place of disobedience. I'll just tell you, the way in which I got to this place in which I'm at right now is the way that any person would look at it and go, yeah, that's not the way it works. Right? So I started with this calling that God, I believe, placed on my life as a 10th grader in high school, sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning at an altar time, and God saying, you're going to serve me full time as a pastor. And I'm sitting there with all these different things happening in my life. You know, health issues with my mom, academic issues, like teachers saying certain things, doing certain things that just really said the opposite of what God was saying. So I could either believe all these other voices, or I could really believe what God was speaking and showing me. And so I chose to believe God. Probably smart, right? But the truth of the matter is I didn't have to. I could have said, yeah, God, I think you missed that one. You just went over. And so from that point, as I began to follow him, the thing that I began to discover and see as I stepped out in obedience is that God was meeting me right where I was every single time. And sometimes I didn't like it at all, because I was like, God, you know what? I'm going to go to college here. And God goes, no, you're not. You're going here. No, I've already applied here. I've already got accepted. Right? That's hard enough, God. Have you seen my GPA? Have you seen, like, this is the place. Okay? And God goes, no, you're going here. And then I go there, and I'm there for a year, and God goes, now you're done. Okay. God, let me just tell you, in case you don't understand how this works. Okay? You're supposed to go to college for 4 years. You're supposed to get your degree. And then you're supposed to just get in this pipeline. And then you're supposed to be like a youth pastor for a little bit. Gain some popularity and traction. And then maybe you'll be cool enough that they'll promote you up to like an associate pastor role. And then sooner or later, after the associate pastor role, you'll be cool enough to be a senior pastor. God, I don't know if you know that, but that is what everybody tells me that needs to happen. And God's like, no, that's not how it's going to happen with you. So God takes me to a different thing. And I start in this ministry internship program where I have more hands-on ministry, and I do that for 2 years. And after those 2 years were up, and I meet my wife, Katie, and we get married. We're sitting there going, God, what do you want us to do? We actually were like, you know what? There's a job opening in Kentucky. We went down there. We interviewed. We loved it. But there was just a couple, you know how sometimes you get those things that are just a little bit off. You're like, I don't know if I really want to be mentored by them as a couple. There's just something weird. You know, and we're like, okay, we're just going to, like a good pastor friend of ours says, are you willing to wait then? Like, are you willing to sit in this uncertainty of like, hey, I don't know when, but it's going to come at some point. And so then God just kind of shifts us to another direction. And we end up getting hired on the staff at a church that we were, I'll be honest, I was not qualified to be the middle school youth pastor at this church. Okay? It was a bigger church. Like, I was very new. I did a lot of dumb things, right? But kids loved it. So that was good. I think God was like, here, I'm going to start you with junior hires because you're about that level, okay? So it worked pretty good. And then, kind of moved through it and ended up being high school pastors and things like that. And I was on that track. It was something like God was going, see, told you I'd get to this point, like youth groups, things really good, big youth group, fun, like exciting time. Zeke born, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm sitting in a conference, and God goes, you're done here. And I'm like, oh, okay, God, we've already had this conversation. Remember back in college, sitting in chapel, right? I told you, this track, and it seems like we're on this track, God. And so God moves us. And the hard part was God only moved us right down the road to another church. But I wasn't a youth pastor. And the interesting part about this is watching God's hand in all this. Because that season was one of the hardest seasons of my life. But it was one of the most transforming seasons of my life. Where God opened up my eyes to a lot of things. And then he took us to Wisconsin. Why in the world did God take us to Wisconsin? For cheese and brats, I guess. I don't know. But there is a plan. God had a plan. And God's plan for Wisconsin for us was to renovate our hearts. To open up our hearts to the calling which he has for us, which ended up opening us for us to come here. You're saying, why am I saying all this? Because oftentimes it's in the have-tos. For me, it was, hey, you're done here, we're going here. It's like, okay, I guess I have to go here. Thanks, God. Wisconsin, yay! Don't know anybody, yay! Let's see how this goes. But it's in those times that God just continues to transform and change. But here's the interesting part. The world, in the Christian bubble that you and I oftentimes live in, tells us something different to what I just explained to you. It does. Because in the world's eyes, it seems foolish. To family members who don't understand or don't know God, it seems really foolish. Why would you do that? I don't understand that. Well, you're not going to understand it because we're following something you're not following. We've surrendered our lives in a way that, we're not answering to you, we're answering to God. Right? And so the world would tell us we're foolish. They'll say, hey, no, you got to go. If you stay in this track, especially even as a pastor, if you stay in this track, you'll get a good, healthy 401k, and you'll make a good amount of money, and you do all these things. And God goes, or you can trust me. Because believe it or not, the world's still there. And all that we do, the world's influence is still there. And it's that thing of going, God, what are you telling me versus what is the world trying to tell me? And so this week, God really brought me back to, actually not even God. We were driving yesterday. This is how fresh this is, so pardon me if it seems broke up. We're driving down. Some of you know Joe and Elaine Knopfsinger. Elaine sits over here. She has a little breathing pack that she walks in with. On Monday night, she was rushed to the ER. Come to find out, she had a mild heart attack. And so she is dealing with, and has been dealing with, congestive heart failure. And so what it is her heart, and we just know this because we were there yesterday. We prayed over her, and got a funny story. I carry this thing because Jeff told me to. Jeff's not here. It's peppermint, right? So I dip it on my hand, get it for oxygen, whatever. I went to throw this in my pocket, and I grabbed a different thing that looked like this. And it's the little bit, I have oil that you anoint people with. And so I'm pulling up to Chick-fil-A, and Katie's like, hey, we're going to head over there afterwards. And I went to pull this out to kind of, do the thing. And I'm like, oh, man, this is like baby oil, Good thing I didn't lick it. That would be gross, okay? But anyways, I go, well, I guess we're supposed to anoint her with oil. So I don't know why I have it in my pocket, but I guess we'll do that. So anyways, coffee detect. There we go. So we go in, we pray over and all this stuff. And they begin to explain to us that her heart isn't pumping and isn't strong enough to pump out the fluids. I'm not a nurse. If you want more information, ask Donna to help you with this. But last week she was ready in case I collapsed. So, but basically what's happening is her heart's not doing what it's supposed to do at the course we're supposed to do. So this week she had 1,200 cc's of fluid removed from the little sac around your lungs. I don't know. Someone told me, I don't know how much 1,200 cc's is. But basically they held up this jug that was about this big that she was drinking stuff out of. She goes, it was 2 of those. I'm like, what? Like, I go, that had to feel horrible. And she goes, no, it feels great now. Everything was kind of pushing up. And so, as we were kind of going down there, we were praying over her, and we were coming back. One of the things we started talking about was just all the different things that are happening right now. With the Commons, with just, worship, and with youth, and with Sunday mornings. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Staff things. I mean, you name it. Katie said this thing to me. She's like, I really think you got to talk about serving. And that's where this whole thing yesterday became, this whole serving as act of war. And she goes, and here's what you need to talk about. I'm like, yes, ma'am. Okay? Don't tell her I told everybody she's 47. Okay? Because you guys always tattle on me, I know. So my kids come back to me and tell me, and so did my wife. Okay? But she said this. She goes, tell them about this verse. I'm like, well, you come in and tell them about this verse. Right? But she says, for even the Son of Man came not to what? Be served. But to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. You see, this one verse to me, it hits. And it hits because there's times where I don't want to serve. I want to be served. Anybody else? It's okay. I'm repenting. You can too. Okay? Like, there's times I don't want to do another thing. I'll tell you what, being laid up for a week, like, it made me like go, hey, I got to get back to this. Like, man, we got a lot to do. Like, we need to get moving. And, but this was the verse that really hit. Let's get back to following Jesus' example in everything we do. Because here's the thing, like, Katie and I sat and talked about this a little bit. We both grew up in churches where serving was the thing you did. It was like the thing we loved to do, right? And somehow the churches kind of they've gotten into this position that we get served, right? Now we serve. And I'm not saying that's not, our church does a fairly good job, but there's a kind of a little pocket. And some of it is we don't talk about it enough. We don't share different opportunities, in which we're going to talk a little bit more about it here in a minute. But, we've got to follow Jesus' example. When Jesus says he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life for a ransom of man, what we see from this very word is what I've been saying from the beginning. Serving is an act of war. Like, when we get out of the things we want to do, and we start serving others, it literally is a declaration of war against the enemy's plans. Because anytime we go outside of ourselves and we serve others, it's completely different than the enemy's plan. Right? And here's what you got to understand. In Ephesians, it says, and I'll bring us back to this, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood and enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in the dark world, and against the evil spirits in heavenly places. What we have to understand is this serving is an act of war against the enemy. Okay? And what we see is this. When we say that serving is an act of war, what we see from the life of Jesus is simple. Okay? When we serve, we are reminding the enemy of what Jesus has done. Okay? Number one, Jesus' ultimate sacrifice on the cross. We're mirroring that. Now, we're not sitting there hanging on a cross, but he laid down his life for another. Right? Greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for one's friends. When we begin to serve, we're declaring to the enemy the God in which we follow and we serve. The example of which we are following, which is Jesus. We're willing to lay down our life for whatever it means, or whatever we need to do to see God's kingdom come and his will be done here on this earth. Right? And there's some of us, God will call and He'll send us overseas, and we'll go to different places, and we'll be here really fearful, but for some reason the people going there are always like, yes, let's do this, And like, they're super excited because they understand God's calling and protection, and if they die, they die, and if they don't, they don't. But yeah, we're sitting back there going, I don't want to die, right? But what we're doing, when we step out and we begin to serve, what we do is we're declaring to the enemy what Jesus ultimately did and reminding him what He ultimately did on the cross. The second one is this. When we serve, we're reminding the enemy of what Jesus has done. And we're reminding him of Jesus' motto for serving others. Paul says it this way. Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking for your own interest, but each of you in the interest of others. You see, the second one that we see when we declare this act of war, we declare it against our enemy, but then we declare it also against our flesh. And this is the one, I think, for most of us, is the hardest. Because what we begin to see when we declare this act of war against the enemy, or against our flesh, we're going all the way back to Adam and Eve. We're going all the way back to the first, the time that they sinned. And here's what we see when we look at this story of Adam and Eve. If you think all the way back, the serpent, right, embodied the devil's deceitful nature. It tempted Eve with the fruit of the forbidden tree and whispered lies that appealed to her selfish desires. Right? Why is it half the time we don't want to serve? Because we have our own desires. Why aren't people serving me? Like, I'm the one that needs serving. Like, look at all this stuff I do. Look at all the things I've done. Look at all the money I've given. All this stuff. I should be served. And we have these selfish desires. He promised her knowledge and power, enticing her to disobey God's command for her own selfish gain. And in moments of weakness, humanity fell from grace, forever tainted by the stain of sin. You see, the enemy was very specific in his tactic. The enemy whispered lies that appealed to her selfish desires. So the question becomes this: why does the devil desire for us to be selfish? It goes all the way back to the garden. And the enemy's plan in the garden was simple: to separate us from God and from one another. I remember when we went back to COVID in 2020, right? And when everything got shut down, and then it lingered on a little bit longer than the 2 week, whatever everything was. I forgot the term they used.
2 weeks to slow the spread.
What was it?
Slow the spread. Right?
Flatten the curve, slow the spread, whatever it was, whatever, right? And it was interesting because, if anything, it exposed a few things. And one of the things that really exposed was this desire to separate people. And during that time, the hate and the war that was against those who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, we're not going there this morning, but like you see, they started trying to pit each other against each other. And then the church was selfish because they're wanting to be together. And I had a pastor friend of mine from Ohio say this to me. He goes, think about this for a minute. Like God said from the very beginning, He declared this. It's not good that man what? Be alone. And also, man was called to work and tend the garden. What was the two things that was taken away at that time? Work and together. It's interesting. It's not hard to see that the enemy's plan is very real, and it's very hey, we can see it physically. We saw it physically. But here's what we begin to see. Even in that picture, serving breaks our selfish desires. I got to tell you, I don't truly get this. I mean, I get this. Let me start. From the time I was young, I've always loved serving. It's my favorite thing. I'd rather do that than sit up here. I'd rather run the soundboard. I've said this before. I'd rather run a soundboard than even speak up in front of people. I'd rather haul in carts, plug in wires, do all this stuff that we do on a regular basis. It's no problem with me. Now, Question is, do you get tired with it? Yeah, sometimes. At times, do you get a little mad at other people? Yeah. But honestly, I don't know if it's really mad as much as it's people are missing out. Because I got to tell you something. So every morning, this curtain's open, all this stuff. We come in, that door opens up, and there's a group of guys that meet out there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we wait. Rod's waiting right there. He's got the key in the door. Because early on when we did it, we kind of snuck in a couple minutes early and set alarms off and all kind of, So we just decided, no, Rod, you're going to have to wait. Make sure your clock's synced up like NASA or whatever it is so that we get in the right time. And so 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a group of guys that just come in. And they just begin to set all this up. All our sound, all of our kids' rooms, all the stuff in the lobby. And it takes everything in here about 45 minutes, roughly. I don't know. What time are you guys all done? Where's Big Rob? About 8 o'clock. So about an hour. They all do it. And then they go eat donuts and talk. Okay? So, now you know their real secret. Okay? Last week, it was a rough one. Okay? Last week it was rough because Brian, who's like the do-all man, I don't know where, I think he's up there. He actually is the do-all man today because he's running sound and lyrics. And did setup and pulled the trailer and all these things. Okay? Well, anyways, Brian was gone last week. Keith was gone last week. And all of us said, from now on, we're vetoing their vacation requests on the same days. Because you felt the absence. But can I tell you something? It wasn't so much about their ability to lift things, plug things in. You just miss them. There's a camaraderie. There's this love for every person that's in this, does this together. The joke is right now, Rob waits for us to get these speakers up on top, and he's the tallest one on the team. And he comes in a minute after, and I joked this morning, we were doing it, and I looked at Zach, I think it was, Zach was with me, and I'm like, Zach, you know what's going to happen? We're going to get this up, and here's Rob going, hey, guys. That's what we did. No joke. We dropped the speaker on right here, and here comes Big Rob. Hey. All of us were dying laughing because I had just said it, But it's just, sir, that seems really stupid. You're like, oh, well, what? Yeah, you got guys that can do that, but I got to tell you, it gets tiring. It does. So the big verse that kept going through our heads this week was, don't get weary. Don't get weary in doing good. For the right time, you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. Every day, every week after this time, in about 40 minutes, we'll probably open all this up. We'll start packing these things up. Everything's numbered and boxed together, and it reels right back out and goes right back on the trailer. And at the end, we'll shut the door open, and I'll make this one statement. I've done it pretty much since we've been here. 1 week closer. 1 week closer. What does that mean? 1 week closer to not having to do this anymore. We don't know when that week is. Wish it did, But that just means there's going to be different things that need to be done. But can I tell you something? We've had different moments in our 8 years where we've been kind of semi-portable and full portable and all this stuff. But there was a season when we were at the mall there for a while that we didn't do this anymore. I got to tell you something. Those guys seemed a little lost. But somehow they figured it out and they started a pool league on Sunday mornings, I guess. I don't know. But you can see how much that means. Or if it's someone on the worship team, we're incorporating new people in week week out, and we're trying to figure out worship going ahead, and we're interviewing people, and we've got different things in which we're praying to God for. And some people have been like, you need to tell us what we need to be praying for. Okay, I'm going to tell you what we need to pray for. Somebody that can do worship and do youth. That's what we need. Same here. It's got to be the same person, right? But somebody that can kind of tow both of those ropes. And why? Well, because we really feel like we're missing something in which God has spoken of our church from very early age, that there's this anointing for youth over this church. And part of that, I think, is the calling in which God has given Katie and I, and the things in which Katie and I have moved in for years. But there's just opportunity. Remember last week we talked about Jesus opening up opportunities and the urgency with it? Like there's opportunities. And so like we're really praying. Next week, the next couple weeks, Chloe and Psyche will be back. They're ones that we're talking to right now, just to be flat out honest with you. And so they're going to be leading over the next couple weeks and then Easter again. But here's the thing. We want what God wants. We don't want what we want. And most of all, we want that whoever that is that's going to be leading that to feel this sense of calling to go, no, I no matter if you pay me or not, I'll do this. So, we're in a war. And so the thing that I wanted to really say today is simply this. Let's go to war together. And here's what I'll say to you, okay? I don't need you coming with your weapons. I need you coming fully clothed with the weapons that God's already given you. He said, come, put on my full armor. Bonnie, I'm going to respond to your no. But it's amazing to see, even as God's stirring this in our hearts yesterday, I get a message and a long note even from what God is speaking to Bonnie. And I got to tell you, it's beautiful because I love when God does something and it makes sense together. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes you hear something and you get something, you're like, I don't know how that computes completely, so maybe I have to sit on it for a little bit here, and so I'll wait. But like there's times where that word is right now and God's doing it. And God's not asking us to come with our made-up armor, just like they wanted to do to David. Like, here, put Saul's armor on. No. Like, God's equipped us, and He's given us armor that fits us. And so, like, we need to be read up, we need to be prayed up, we need to start giving, we need to start serving again, we need to get out of the stands and start getting into the game. Right now, I would say we have probably about 30% of the people that go to our church serve in some way. But can I tell you something? This is the thing that hit us yesterday as Katie and I were talking. And it goes back to a conversation that our elder team was having just about calling and the different ministries in which God has given us. And Janelle actually happened to say this because she serves once a month in the kids' ministry. And she goes, we need to do kids the right way, and we need to do it well. Because there's kids that are in that room, when I was in there this morning, that might be the only Jesus they get to experience all week. And so I'm willing to serve, I'm willing to teach, I'm willing to do whatever I need to do because I want them to meet Jesus every week. And so that's that passion, that's the thing of understanding, when we come with our best because God gave His best. He laid down His life as a ransom for many, and we want people to know about Jesus. And so, as crazy as it is that we have people come in and have to set up and tear down and all this stuff, they're doing it because there might be the chance that there might be somebody that's here that doesn't know Jesus, and they're going to experience Jesus. But even as we sit here, and as Casey led us in worship, and the band's been playing and practicing all day, they're doing what they're doing because they just really want to usher in this moment where we can just experience God's presence in an up-close, personal, intimate way. Do we see that? That's why we do what we do. I don't just get up here every week and go, okay, well, I guess I'll turn to this page and go, I'll speak about that. I got to tell you, I know pastors that do that. And actually, it's not really that. It's okay, I'll go online. Here's this guy's message. Oh, cool, he's got transcripts. I'll preach the transcripts. True. I made a decision a long time ago that I will not step on this stage if it's not something fresh that God has spoken and He's speaking to me. I won't. It's hard every week to come with something different, something new, something fresh. In the 25 years I've been doing this, there may be a handful of messages that I've actually spoken multiple times. And so at that point, you got to be dependent. You got to stay close. And if there's something that I'm really passionate about, It's this. It's like it's time to go to war together. And everybody has something that they can do to serve. And that serving is going to be this act of war against the enemy and against our flesh. And it's going to break off those selfish desires that you and I have. If you've had people in your life going, you're just selfish, okay, start serving. And see if they still say you're selfish. It's impossible. But we want to come from this place of humility. We want to come with this place of going, God, however you can use this, use this. And some of you are like, I don't know how God can use the gifts that I have in church. Well, let's have a conversation, because you might be surprised. And the other kind of thing that people usually push back against, challenge against, are like, well, everything about serving in the church is like just what the church needs and all that stuff. I'm hoping that serving here causes you to serve there and other places. I'm hoping it stirs something up inside of you that is just not about a Sunday morning. It's about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Like it becomes what you do because you're just following the example of the one who laid down his life for you. It's what you do. And you're taking those gifts, those abilities, those talents, those things that God's given you, and you're saying, God, however you want to use them, use them. And so this morning, before you leave, I really want to challenge you to do this. On the screen here, there's a QR code. Pull your phone out. Everybody pull your phone out. Go ahead, pull your phone out. Even if you're not, you're going to lie to me, just point it at the screen and pretend like you're clicking the QR code. You're like, I don't know this thing. Okay, you open your camera. If you don't know how to do this, you open your camera, put it to there, and it'll pop up and say, hey, do you want to go to this website? Yes. Okay? And take you to a form. If you have the app, you can do this same thing. It's under the More tab, and it says Life Teams. There's a whole bunch of different things in there. There's assessment that we would love for you at some point to go through as well. It's just the fivefold ministry assessment. And really what that is we believe that God's given these gifts to the church, which are you and I, and He's equipped us with different giftings and talents. And so with those, it's to create these environments that really bring life change. And so there's so much to that. We'd love for you to be part of that. But sometime, either this morning before you leave or sometime before you go to bed today, I want you to sign up for one thing. That's it. That's all I'm asking you. For some of you, it might be able to help us build some things at the Commons and maybe helping demo things, clean the floor, do the floor in a minute. Like in the next few days, probably around Wednesday, Thursday, we're going to be mopping. How many want to mop 30,000 square feet? We got a machine, so it's a little easier, okay? But we've got to mop that whole place to get it ready for the hardener and all that stuff. But for some of you, you might be, hey, my gift is I like to cook. Well, one of the things that God's laid on our heart is this little course thing that we're doing called Alpha. Right now, there's about 30 people between Tuesday nights and Sunday nights going through it. And one of the things we know as we move into our time, we move into the Commons, we're really hoping that this becomes something that's not so much about us as a church, but as an opportunity to introduce people to Jesus, because everybody has questions. And what that whole course is about is questions. And so it's questions about God, questions about faith, and it's an introduction, and it answers all these questions. It's a great evangelistic tool. And one of the things is we need people that are willing to cook for those things. We need people that are willing to help out in that area. Right now we're doing it just amongst the different people, but as we get more people from the community or friends and family members that you have that aren't connected to the church, we really don't want to sit there and go, hey, can you bring like chips next week? You know, no, I might get to that point, but we know that there's some people that would love to do that. Or maybe some of you say, hey, I've got some time on those nights, and one of the things that we've got to do is offer childcare so that it takes away another excuse, right? And so, like, we offer childcare and all that stuff. There's all kinds of stuff on there. Like, as you read through that, you'll see there's a lot. A couple weeks ago, I said to you, there was a song that I wanted to do really bad. And it's been a song that's on repeat at our house. But I got to tell you, the conversations in our house have been this lately, and I hope it's the same with you. Like, let's just keep asking God. Let's just keep asking, because He just keeps doing it again. Like, He keeps answering over and over and over again. And a couple weeks ago I said there's a new song Elevation came out with just called Another One. And Casey's going to sing it this morning. Some of you might know the words, some of you probably don't. But I want you to listen to the words this morning And let's just begin to believe, because we want to get this part right because we know the opportunity that's coming. Because as we get into the Commons isn't just a building. It's not going to just sit there and on Sunday mornings we're going to occupy it. It's going to be serving students. It's going to be serving special needs. It's going to be serving all kinds of different people that have needs. So if we're going to serve people that have needs, the building can't do that. Amen? Amen. The only people that can serve people's needs are who? People. People that are looking for the opportunity and have this urgency to go. We need to introduce them to Jesus. We mark that building with this one phrase that says, this is a place where meaningful connections happen. And the most meaningful one, the most life-changing one, is one of a connection to Jesus. And we believe that God is going to open up opportunities all over the place for us to do that. And so this morning I want to pray, and then Casey and the team are going to sing this song. But let's just believe this in faith together as we sing it. Jesus, we thank you that you are moving and that you are doing good things. I thank you that today, God, you're calling us as a church together. You're unifying our hearts on purpose, God, to see you the way we should see you, as the one who laid down his life for us as a ransom for many. When you set the example of serving, you didn't come to be served, but to come to serve. And so, God, I pray that today as a church you bring us together under that model. That, God, we would be willing to serve one another as you served us. And so today, God, I just pray in faith that as we sing this song, as we listen to these words, that, God, this wouldn't just be a song on the screen, but it'd be the very testimony of what you're doing in my life and in each and every life in this room. And so, God, I ask you to move in such a powerful way. Bring us together as one so that we can see your kingdom come and your will be done. People's lives changed in this county. God, the story's not over. And you're not finished. And so, God, whatever way you can do it, use us as unequipped and untalented and that we feel, God. God, we know that you've given us everything we need to do what you've called us to do. So may we listen and may we lean.